major scientists were members of the American Eugenics Society. They start to back away from it in the next decade when its full implications start to become obvious. But also, this is only a couple of decades after Mendel's work in heredity had been rediscovered. So heredity is a rather new science, and it's put to some dubious applications in its early decades.
I'm wondering if after the trial, Scopes made a career change. Was he able to continue to teach? You mentioned he coached. What happened to him after the trial?
He ends up leaving Tennessee not too long afterward. There again, I end up thinking of the movie Inherit the Wind, where the poor guy feels like he's being run out of town or something. But he, from what I've read of him, I hesitate to call it, great regret on his part, but it's just more of a head shaking. I don't believe I got into this. But yes, he does leave town and go to Chicago. So.
You've told us about the characters in the trial and the context it occurred in, but you really haven't told us about your book. Where did the pictures come from? How did you assemble it? Is all the information I thought you could use a plug too.
I appreciate it.
The information you've given in your talk today, is that all in the book?
Yes.
Would you talk about that a little bit, please?
It is in the book. I'm telling you some of the material that's in the book. We call it a photographic history. What happened was several years ago, the University of Tennessee Special Collections called me and said, Jim Lloyd, the head of Special Collections, said, "Ed, do you know about these pictures we have in boxes over here?" I didn't. And the reason he called me, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about that dissertation, which I had published a monograph out of, the Scopes, a Scopes monograph, and then later had done work on Darwin. That was the book that came out in '97, Darwinian Myths, which doesn't talk much about Scopes, if at all. But there again, if you do Darwin, you're talking about Scopes. People on campus knew that. So Jim graciously called me and said, "Do you know about these things? The 75th anniversary is not that far off. Do you think the University of Tennessee Press wants to bother with these?" I had no idea. So I called the University of Tennessee Press, and they said, "Sure, that sounds interesting. Let's take a look at it." And I did. And there were photographs that, to me, looked worthy of publication, but had never been collected in one place. I've seen some of them in various venues, some of them never. I didn't have time to put all this together, quite frankly. I had another publishing commitment at that time, and I was trying to figure out how to do this in such a short period of time. You understand, when you're talking about publishing a book, a year or so isn't a very long time at all. It's no time, in fact. Well, about that time, Edward Larson, that was shortly after, he had won the Pulitzer Prize for his Summer for the Gods book. So he seemed a logical fellow to call. Here was the best book ever written on the Scopes trial. I think I've read all of them anyway. And Larson's far away. So I called him and I said, "What do you think? You think we could put something together here?" And he did. As we were talking about how to get this done and do something of quality in this short period of time, this is sort of the formula that we hit upon. And Jesse Mayshark, who wrote the afterword, is a political writer in Knoxville. And he had written about the evolution legislation at about that time. So that's how we got this whole thing put together, with me doing the intro, Larson doing those narrative captions, and Mayshark doing the 1990s update, if you will. This is where Scopes is in 1999, was basically what he was writing about.
You might want to tell them how many photos there are and some of the things that they depict.
We have about 40 photographs in here, and I'm not sure how well we can pick some of these up, but for example, we get Robinson's Drugstore, where it all starts. And the reason for some of these photos, let me tell you, first of all, we didn't have a lot to choose from. So some cases, we just took what was available. That's always a problem with history and photography, or any kind of history. You take what's available. It's not necessarily what you want. But this is it. This is the idyllic, it looks like Mayberry. And it really is a wonderful little town. Even to this day, it's got this sort of idyllic feel to it. But that's where it all started, at Robinson's Drugstore. And this is one of my favorites. The reason being, it's the postures of the people. I think I've tried to get my fingers out of the way here. The postures of the people. Here's Scopes leaning forward. He's just falling all over himself to shake Darrow's hand. He's almost servile. But as I don't like the way Scopes looks there. You know, he's just too anxious to meet the great man. Look at Darrow. He's not even looking at Scopes. He's looking at the camera, which of course is appropriate. That's why he's there, publicity, to further the cause of Clarence Darrow. And I think it also illustrates well the fact that Darrow, quite frankly, did not give a damn about John Scopes or anyone in Dayton, Tennessee. And that's what the picture shows here. And then, of course, a finishing touch, there's a fellow in between them. He's sort of leaning forward like this into the picture. Well, that's John Neal. He's the local attorney. He's actually from Knoxville, but perfect posture for the local representative because he's like Dayton itself, kind of leaning forward. Let's get into the picture however we can. And I'm here for the publicity, so let me tag along with these great names. We don't have a lot of pictures of the townspeople, but this one I thought was appropriate for this collection because it is a picture of some men in Dayton loafing around on the street at the time of the trial. However, it's a stereotype too. You notice how what you've got here are some people who are cast as just that, the drugstore loafers that the other historian was talking about. Here they are. They look like they're out of the hills. In fact, they've got on white shirts, and if you look closely, they're not comfortable in them. Now, is that because they don't know how to wear anything other than coveralls, or is it because it's 90-some degrees outside and they've got long-sleeve shirts on at the time? Well, you can decide that one. Well, how can we do without monkeys at the Scopes trial? We've got lots of monkeys. Dayton was importing monkeys at the time. They were bringing these things from local carnivals and circuses, and of course, the people who had them were bringing them to Dayton too. This is part of the misunderstanding that people evolved from monkeys, which is not what natural selection says, but it makes a nice frame. It's fun. It's easy to pick up on, easy to understand. It's also important not only because it reflects the misunderstanding of Darwin's theory, but it also tells you what the nature of the trial is for Dayton. Again, it's a farce. People in Dayton knew it